This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
So I have not updated my YouTube channel art in 4 years. 4 years. I wish I had a valid excuse for this. I do not. All I know is it's time. I'm sick of logging on to my YouTube channel page and seeing this person and just feeling like, who is that? I don't know who she is. So we have a to-do list in today's video. So what are the goals? First of all, I need a new icon. I am sick of people that I know in person finding me on the internet and being like, is this you? Second of all, I need a new YouTube banner because I'm having the exact same issue with that one. It has absolutely nothing to do with my art as it is now and was designed at a point in my YouTube channel where things were headed in a completely different direction. Number 3, I'm gonna finally get my act together and actually create brand accurate custom icons for all of my Patreon tiers because I started my Patreon on a whim and I never even got around to doing like any of that. I'm just trying to get everything updated so that I don't have to log onto my YouTube account and see an older version of me attempting to commit identity theft. Okay, so for my channel art itself, I have already thumbnailed out a couple of ideas in my crappy sketchbook to give me somewhat of a direction to go in. So this is what we're working with. I have this kind of concept as my new icon, you know, like hair with the bangs, down, my usual accessories, and then the red glasses and some little horns that are also red. Because you know what, why not? Just lean right into the anime of it all, even though I barely watch anime these days. And then for the banner, I'm thinking something like the duality of man, me drawing hunched over my sketchbook on one side and then me sewing hunched over my sewing machine on the other side. Just like really fuse the themes of this channel, and of course in the middle, the executive producer. And then for the Patreon art, I have just the 4 tiers, and for the most part I like the concepts of the little icons that go alongside the tiers. So my goal here would really just be tweaking it a little bit to make it more consistent with the updated branding for the channel. This is not a side of running a channel that I particularly like, but I'm told that it's effective and helpful, so I'm gonna try to do it. Listen, today is about trying. I've been putting a lot of hours into designing new channel art in this video, and when you have to do that, it doesn't always leave a lot of time to focus on other aspects of your online presence. Thankfully, a lot of that other tedious promotional work can be simplified with this video's sponsor, Squarespace. I've talked a lot about how easy it is to build a stunning Squarespace site with their professionally designed flexible website templates and drag and drop fluid engine. But this process has gotten even more streamlined and intuitive with the Squarespace Blueprint AI system. It's a new guided system you can choose from professionally curated layouts and styling options to build a unique online presence tailored to your brand and optimized for every device. And with an unrivaled suite of built-in visual design effects, you can keep visitors engaged and make your website stand out, and even connect social and multimedia accounts in a few clicks to unify your online identity. And when you're finished designing your site and ready to launch, you can get discovered fast with integrated, optimized SEO tools, so your website shows up more often to the people who are most likely to become your long-term audience. And all these tools also work alongside your integrated online store, where Squarespace has all the tools you need to sell physical goods, digital content, or even specialized services. And Squarespace also now has flexible payment options to make checkout seamless for your customers. You can now accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, and offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay in eligible countries. So if you want to create your own effortless, professionally designed website, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/PricklyAlpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much as always to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. Okay, hello. I just recorded this entire section without my mic on. Love that, really good. So first of all, your girl is finally getting her act together and planning. I'm actually planning things out. I'm doing visual development for projects, and I hate to say that planning works and it's efficient, but you know what? It kind of does work and it kind of is efficient. Crazy concept. So I want to do kind of a combination of my more painterly, sketchy stuff that I do for my character designs, and then also my more graphic, animatic style. So I have saved kind of a mix of those things on my Pinterest board. I have these more graphic, simplified, cute art styles, and then also some more like lineless, free stuff. And I don't have much on here because I swear Pinterest is just the Wild West, and everything on here is AI, but it's hard to avoid. My eyes need better training anyways. On that note, some of my visual inspirations are just pieces that I have done in the art style that I was talking about because, hey, I know that it's safe. And in addition to that, we got some color palettes for the direction that I want to go in, and finally I have a bunch of fantasy sort of trees and environments because that's something that I also want to include in these pieces. And you know what? Probably all of these are AI generated. I don't have the patience to go through and find ones that aren't. It's so hard on Pinterest. Enough of that yapping. I'm actually gonna finally get into it and do the art, and I'm gonna start on the YouTube icon because I think that that's gonna be the easiest piece to complete, and it'll also kind of like set my palette for the art style that I'm gonna use for these moving forward and make sure that I stay consistent. So let's get right into it, and by get into it, I mean paste a photo of my thumbnail sketch into my art software because I don't feel like redrawing this again. Okay, let's do it.
So while I work on this one, I thought it would be fun if I talk about my process a little bit because I rarely ever do that on this channel, and I actually haven't even done a finished piece on this channel in a while, so I'm gonna actually explain what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So normally in my character design videos, I will start from a super rough sketch. I rarely ever do any like actual line art at this point. I just am over it. I don't feel like doing it, so I don't. I either start from a sketch that is super messy, it still has a lot of the character in it, and then I end up coloring the lines later, or I do what I'm doing here, and I make a lot of selections and clipping masks, and if I want to add any like solid lines, I'll just do that on top of everything later, and I'm very choosy about which lines I actually have in the finished piece. So this is basically the style that I use whenever I do my animatics. I do use like my transparent watercolor brush, which is my painting brush, a little bit in this piece. Normally I do my animatic pieces with like just the calligraphy pen, the entire thing. Sometimes I'll go in a little bit with the airbrush to get some like gradients, and I also do that here as well. But normally I'm just color picking and messing around with the calligraphy pen because it just gives you such nice decisive edges and it makes it so shapy, and that's just, I don't know, what my brain finds satisfying right now. But I especially like using this style on headshots and portraits and that sort of thing because it's such a compact, focused area to just detail and get really stylized with how I do all the lighting and how I present everything, especially like little accessories and stuff like that. And especially this is such a fun style to render faces in. Like again, this is a very shapy style, so it really emphasizes all of the planes of a face really nicely, and it looks really good whenever you add rim light to everything, which is a huge staple of my work. Even if there's no rim light in the piece, I'm like, yeah, actually, you know what? There's gonna be rim light in there. I don't care if it looks accurate. I don't know why the beginning of this voiceover is just, I implore you to steal my art style, but if you ever want to try something like this, and especially if you find lineless art styles to be a little bit intimidating, I feel like the process of this piece is a pretty good guide, so let me finally get to explaining the process. So once I got finished sketching over the sketch that I said I wasn't gonna sketch over, I basically started blocking in big areas of color on separate layers for sections that would be rendered all at once, if that makes sense. So main layers in this, skin was a layer, and then hair was a layer, and then I could lock each of those layers with a basic local color and then start adding gradients and shadows. For the skin, I kind of have a formula for in neutral lighting where I want to emphasize certain parts of the face. So I sort of take whatever is my neutral skin color and then I make it a little bit darker and a little warmer around areas of like the hairline and under the jaw, anywhere where there would be like larger areas of shadow. And then of course I add some rosiness to the cheeks. I add a little bit more rosiness around the nose area, just because if you know like the zones of the face and the kind of undertones that generally happen in the different zones of the face, it's like a joke with the Tumblr art style, but the cheeks and the nose do tend to have a little bit more warmth in them. And then I'll add a little bit more brightness around like the inner corners of the eyes and around the corners of the nose and mouth and the bridge of the nose. Any high points on a face are of course going to have a little bit more highlight, so they get more brightness to the painting color that I'm using. And I did end up painting most of the face in this particular piece with my transparent watercolor brush, but then there are certain areas that I want to be more of a hard color, like the eyes for example, that I do go in and kind of like line and do the makeup effect with the calligraphy pen. And since eyes are so important in this piece, eyes are another thing that I did on a completely separate layer so that I can lock the transparency and sort of like make sure that I can do what I want to do with them in isolation. I want to make sure they get enough depth and shadow, and then I also want to make sure that I don't use white. I want to make sure I use a very neutral, for this one almost like like lavender color for the eyes, because the whites of your eyes really will appear pretty gray in most neutral lighting, but gray is boring. So we use purple because it's a more interesting undertone for the colors in a piece like this. Eventually I was finding the lighting in this piece to be like a little bit too neutral, so instead of going for just like basically ring light effect lighting, I did add some lighting that came more from like the left side of her face to the piece with just like a multiply layer painted in according to that directional lighting with just like a dark crimson color. And then sometimes I will lock that layer and go in and paint in like slightly lighter, slightly warmer shades of red on like highlighted areas. It depends. I also did that same multiply layer over the hair with more of a purple tone to get some shading on that. And then with that lighting in place, I could completely turn off my oversketch and actually go in and kind of start rendering more definitive details. I added highlights to the hair, in the little red circle glasses, and the jewelry, basically all on separate layers. And then also for this piece, I actually didn't end up rendering all of the jewelry too much. I sort of stopped with the intention of doing that, but then I figured it's gonna be, you know, an icon. It's not gonna really read that well from far away anyway, so I ended up going with a very simplified style. And I actually really enjoy how graphic simplified styles like this can be, especially whenever they're up against like a slightly more rendered style. It's one of those things that makes my brain happy. And speaking of which, for this piece I also went for a super bold red background because I really wanted the white hair to stand out against that. And one of my favorite tricks to do whenever I'm doing hair like this is have like a really bold shapy shape for the hair, but then add little wispies and like a bold color to make it really stand out and look a little bit more detailed than it actually is. So I did that on this, and I just love the look of the little white hairs against the red background. It's one of those stylistic things that really does it for me. And speaking of stylistic flares that make me happy, I finished off the piece with a couple of sparkles and some rim light, because those are just staples of my art style that I can't seem to ever abandon.
Okay, boom, there it is. I have maybe a couple of finishing touches to do, but for putting this off for literally 4 years, this took me like an hour and 8 minutes to do. An hour and 8 minutes. So for the YouTube banner, this is the concept that I am working with so far. It's pretty directly taken from the concept art that I had in my sketchbook, but I wanted to kind of have red vibes, but for the most part, like color, whimsy. I want it to be a representation of my work, so I don't know what direction I want to go in yet. I've also done another super rough thumbnail that's more like cosplay fantasy themed, which I think would be fun. But I also want people to have more of a representation of what they're in for whenever they click on my channel, and I feel like the hunched over sewing and drawing is more accurate for that. So I don't know. I'm gonna do a couple more iterations and ideas, and then we'll see which one I end up going with.
2 days later.
So for the banner, I was working on this original concept, and I even got pretty deep into it. Like you can see, I've begun doing color and stuff like that. And then I decided I didn't like it. So then I started messing around with this, you know, something a little bit more fantasy themed. I was thinking maybe I could draw some of my cosplays or something. And I decided didn't like this either. Then I started working on something that would be kind of a treehouse theme. Hold on. Something along these lines with more of a fantasy background, because for some reason I've been in the mood to do an environment painting this week. So then that spiraled into these. I was just messing around with compositions to see which one I liked. Different angles. This is like a low angle. This is a higher angle. And then this one ended up being one that I kind of liked the best for whatever reason. I've just been in a real Ghibli mood lately, and this feels very much that. So I think this is what I'm finally going to move forward with. So, oh boy, oh geez, this spiraled all the way out of control. What started as a simple YouTube banner that I thought was gonna take like a couple of hours sort of turned into an environment painting study. Like actually after coming up with this idea, I kind of slept on it to figure out what would be a good way to approach this. And the next day I actually got up and did like some actual environment studies with like trees and greenery to make sure that I kind of know what I'm doing whenever I'm drawing that sort of thing. And then I went into this whole actual piece which took much longer than I expected it to. So in my first session of working on this, I was kind of just trying to lay it out and come up with like a good, decent composition and a good sketch, which was kind of challenging because with this being so wide, my usual trick of relying on the rule of thirds just like doesn't look quite as good as it does whenever you're working with portrait or landscape. So I initially really struggled with like finding a good focal point and like where to place my character and my cat, and also how to deal with the little like treehouse office situation that I had that was supposed to be more of a background element. I've never been good with compositions and like foreground, middle ground, and background whenever it comes to landscapes or environment paintings like this. It's one of the reasons why I'm trying to like work on it. Any opportunity that I have to turn work into also like studies and learning, I do, because I don't have that much free time. So this is a good thing, but as you can see, I'm like very deeply indecisive whenever I was like beginning this piece. So at first, a big thing here was just trying to figure out what kind of like setting I really wanted it to be, where to put everything, and most importantly, like the lighting and time of day. I was doing a lot of like basically full color little lighting drafts to figure out, did I want it to be, you know, midday, afternoon? I even tried one that was more nighttime. Still, after all that, did not have a firm decision, so I actually ended up asking the patrons, and they did want me to do a daytime version, so that's what I ended up going with in the long run. After fumbling through like that beginning stage of trying to figure out what I wanted the color situation to be like, I decided that the foundation of the drawing itself was not good enough to move forward with, so I actually went back in and kind of redid the sketch and refined it even more, especially trying to like flip my canvas and make sure the perspective was decent enough. Even though I was eyeballing it, I wanted to make sure the whole little office situation was laid out enough so that I could like know what was on my shelves and where everything was supposed to be. And then after like trying to refine things even more and suffer through trying to do like color blocks the second day, I finally just resigned myself to it. I knew the entire time it was coming, I was gonna have to do some kind of a sketchy line art just so that my brain could actually know where everything goes. And having line art for all of the little items that are like in the office space and on the shelves is just way easier to keep track of than like an infinite amount of layers that I have to sort through. I did want to keep this looser and more like concept arty, and that is the style that I want to move towards with environment paintings like this, but this did allow me to add a little bit more architecture to the little treehouse area. I added a balcony and more definition to the stairs, and just like it makes more sense after actually working with like the lines and everything, but it is an overall pain to have to go in and do whatever. Like essentially by the end of this, I just want the lines to disappear and let my brushwork speak for itself. But the lines did help me to divide this piece up in a much easier way. I had sort of like a foreground and background between the two layers of lines, so that tree branch is sort of the foreground area, and that does extend to the stairs and the little balcony, and then the background is the rest of the tree in the office. And then I was also able to put my cat and my little character on a layer by themselves so that I could, you know, work on them in a more isolated way. This approach was a lot more organized and frankly a lot more pleasant. Too bad I got here maybe 5 hours into working on this piece. It's fine. It's all part of the process. So after finally inking all of the little details in the office and also adding a theoretical greyhound that I very much wish I had, but I don't actually have, I could go in and do flat colors on everything. I could also like tweak and refine my character's outfit a little bit. And honestly, you know, with the outfit in this, I kind of just said, this is fine. It's sort of a combination of a couple of clothing items that I own / like. It's sort of just a fantasy mess. But then again, so is my channel. So I feel like we actually landed we're in the ballpark with the outfit. So once I got all the flats in and the color palette sort of established, I went in with, I think, a color dodge layer. I don't actually remember. And I started just kind of painting in some light and really trying to make the focal point my character and the executive producer. I could have done a much better job with the composition leading your eye to them instead of kind of leading your eye into the office space. Like, I'm not super happy with how I laid things out. There's so many things that I could have done to like make this flow better, but you know what? It's fine. I'm gonna live with it. But anyways, the last couple of hours of this painting are a lot of me messing around with correction layers in the background to make sure that I actually get my values good, trying to make sure that the office area is visible but not overwhelming to the focal point characters, and then also just trying to make sense of sort of like a ambient tree lighting situation. This lighting is sometimes fun to play with because like there's not a ton of rolls to it as long as you have like a general sun direction, but it can also be just like massively frustrating because you have to just imagine a canopy sort of directing light in certain areas. Sometimes it just like doesn't look right, but I'm trying my best. Eventually, to improve the composition, you also see me add in all of these little waterfalls. I was very inspired whenever I was working on this by concept art for, I believe, Breath of the Wild that I just saw around on Pinterest, and these waterfalls feel very Zelda, they feel very Nintendo, and it was just giving me some good fantasy vibes, so I added these in as a nice little framing element. And if even a single one of you is like, where are the waterfalls coming from? She's high up in a tree. Need I remind you, homegirl has her PC set up in a tree. Logic is not a prominent part of this illustration, and this whole time I was also looking for a way to tie the overall stylization and color palette in with the icon that I'd already made, so I was trying to figure out like pops of red to add in. And I had the glasses, I had the little jacket draped over the chair, and I also decided to add in a couple of little moth-inspired red lanterns just to have some pops of red in the piece, so there is at least some red tying it into the bright red of the icon. This was of course a little difficult to make work with some daytime lighting because it's just, you know, red's gonna be completely blown out by the sun for the most part, but I think I was able to sort of make it work. I don't know. Since I did end up doing line art, it might be cool to go back to this piece at some point and do like a nighttime variation where the lighting is a lot more intense and stylized. I don't know if I'll ever want to do that, but you know, it's there, maybe. The final step of this illustration I found was just kind of like making it work. I set all of my line art layers to multiply and then colored all of the lines with similar colors just to give it more of that painterly feel. And then I made a layer above the line art and basically just started painting in and over all of the areas that I just thought needed little tweaks, needed a little bit more darkness, more depth. A lot of the times if there's a shadow that appears to be very neutral, I'll paint into the shadow with a little bit more of a color pop just to give it more visual interest. And then something else I did a lot of was add bright gradients in different areas of the background just to give it a lot of atmospheric perspective. I wanted to give the impression that there was a lot of light spilling in. You know, you got waterfalls in the piece, so that also creates like water vapor in the air, I guess, which is like reflective, so it just gives it a lot more atmosphere, and it also helped a lot to separate the little office area from the characters. If I have background elements in a piece like this, I almost always make the values a little bit too dark when I could easily get away with making them a lot brighter and creating more contrast. So that's something that I did here with the gradients and correction layers, and also just going in and painting like little leaves and patches of tree branches and areas that are just getting hit with direct sunlight. And those areas I also added like fine dots and sparkles just to make it look like there's particles of dust and things in the air that are also getting hit with sunlight. That's something else that's fun that you can do to add a little bit more foreground depth to an image. It's something that I use very liberally in this image, but it is a fantasy piece, so I feel like it fits the whole vibe. One of the last things I did was just go in and paint over some of the details of the office a little bit just to give it more depth and make it blend in with the piece a little bit better. And then I also added a couple of leaves and branches just hanging over the top of the image, just to make it look like they're really just nestled in the center of a tree. If anyone is curious, the premise of this illustration is really just my dream office being in the middle of a treehouse. That would be so sick. It's giving Rivendell, it's giving Lothlorien. I really am just a little forest elf at heart, and that's where this comes from. Feels very on brand for the content that I make, so this is what I chose to be my banner, and against all of the odds of how derailed this illustration got, I feel like it actually kind of did pull together in the end. Did I mention I probably spent about 12 hours on this piece? That's embarrassing. Okay, so finished banner. This was such a struggle, but I think I finally got it to at least a decent point considering the weird composition and trying to like make all of the lighting be balanced. This was a lot of immense suffering, and I need to work on my backgrounds and environments. I don't want this to keep happening. Then we have this, which is the actual banner that's going to go on the channel. So I didn't show this on screen, but I did expand the sides by just panning out a little bit because this is like visible on full desktop, and then this is the standard. And then on a TV, I've never seen this with the background, but apparently it is much, much bigger, and I was not going to paint out an entire background to match this. That's absurd. So I just went in and kind of like added a couple of waterfalls that sort of connect to the main image, and then I also added stars and a moon. Like, it's not fantastic. I don't think it matches super well, but it's fine. And again, I'm not even convinced that this even ever appears on anyone's screen. Let me know if you've ever seen this, because I certainly haven't. So these are my current Patreon icons, minus the executive producer, and I forgot that I actually kind of made some that were halfway decent. I don't hate these, but I do want to make them maybe like a little bit more graphic and interesting, because I did these on my iPad, and I don't like doing finished work on my iPad. So these are very rough sketches of a couple of new icons, and they're more or less the same concepts as the old ones, but I'm just like adding a little bit better art quality to them since my abilities have improved a little bit. And I'm kind of gonna do similar vibe, similar concept again, but something that matches the new channel art a little bit more. So let's bring this whole thing home with an actual simple, straightforward set of pieces. I mean, these were so lovely to work on, and would you believe it, all of these combined only took me an hour. You know, the icon and these were such a layup, you know? No excuses for not doing these earlier, but then you do have that 12-hour banner in the middle that makes this a slightly more complicated project. So for these, I did just use my straightforward, lineless, animatic style. I went in with a flat, solid color layer, and then I added some gradients here and there and a couple of lines for detail, and then a lot of it was just adding a little bit of rim light. Very simple, very graphic, but I do just love the impact of the style, and it's so fun to do because it's not hard like everything else that I do for my art. I especially enjoyed working on the direwolf and the magpie icon. I mean, those were just so much fun. I did end up changing the direwolf from like a normal colored wolf to more of like a white wolf with red eyes, sort of like an albino style wolf, just so that it matches my icon very specifically. I did also end up changing the pose for the magpie from a sitting pose to a flying pose where it's gripping the gem in its actual little talons, which I think is so much cooler and it has so much more impact. And before anyone mentions this as well, I know this isn't a magpie. Traditionally, this is not what a magpie looks like. It's more of a raven or a crow because it's just all, you know, dark colored, but I didn't want to go too complicated for this icon. I want it to be very simple. And then finally, the executive producer image I had so much fun with because the original was really cute. It was just sort of like Tiger, that's my cat's name, the executive producer, in profile, just looking real pretentious and snooty as she is. And I was gonna do something very similar for this, but then I remembered an image from my childhood that we took because we were just having fun, me and my brother dressing up the cat one day, and here it is, absolutely iconic. Princess Tiger. This is like such an inside joke with my family that this exists. So I kind of took inspiration from this image, and I kept the monocle and the top hat from the original, but I also added a little feather boa like she's wearing in the little Princess Tiger image, and I feel like this is just very fitting for the executive producer tier. I think it's so cute, and whenever I imagine all of my executive producers, this is what I think of. So I hope you all know, to me, you are all fancy little cats. And with that, here's all the new finished updated channel art. Wow, it only took me an eternity to get to all of this, but I will say I'm really happy with how all of it came out. I'm thrilled to finally have updated channel art that I feel like represents like what I am making right now and the overall brand and vibe, and also something that's a lot more consistent with the current art style that I use in my videos. I hope you also enjoy it, especially if you're a patron. You know, your new Patreon tier art is your Patreon badge of honor. I hope you wear it proudly. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, even though this was a bit more of a process focused art video, and I usually tend to veer off into some real nonsense whenever I do my character design, so, you know, hey, maybe this is like an actual change of scenery a little bit, but this was very chill to do and work on, and it gave me a little bit of a break, which was really nice. You know, like, I could have done this art on the side and not made a video about it, but I also like the ability to like really think about things and be intentional with my artwork, and making this a video allowed me to do that. So if you watched it, thank you. This isn't super typical of my content, so it might feel out of place. I'm always worried about how these videos perform, but you know what? It's necessary. It needs to happen. Anyways, like I said, thank you so much for watching, but as always, the biggest thank you for this video and all of my videos go to my amazing patrons, and especially my very fancy cat-shaped executive producers. Mossy Raven, Dirt, I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Sarah, Crimson Moon 04, Liana, Ermlergene, Anubix, Breeza, Sony, Brian, Phoenix, Rose Draconi, Ira, Freedom and Gus Gus, Francesca Sliwa, Kat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent.Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Megan Penland, Eno Zine, India Gloom, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.